joining us for today's program, Sustainable from the Start, Developing a Construction Request for Proposals. I am Joanna Goldfarb. I'm the Sustainability Innovation Consultant here at the Rampo Catskill Library System. Before we get started, I do have a few brief housekeeping items. So first is a reminder that this program is being recorded. The recording will go out hopefully by tomorrow. If I can get it all set and ready by then. To keep the recording clean and accessible, we ask that everyone keep your cameras or your microphones off unless you are prompted to unmute, and that will cut down on background noise. After today's program, there will be a survey and you will also receive the program slides. I do also want to give a commercial for another upcoming program on June 5th. We're doing a program on libraries investing in community solar. So you can sign up for that on the RCLS calendar. And last, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Throughout the presentation, I will be monitoring the chat and letting Jody know if there are any questions. So I'm going to pass it off to Jody Spitz-Anderson, who is a subject matter guide and collaborative leader with deep experience in embodied carbon, energy codes, and the AIA framework for design excellence and identifying the synergies between the false silos we have created in our industry. She has a much longer bio. I'm not going to read all of it, but it was on our registration page if you'd like to check it out. And Jody, I will pass it off to you.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. I want to start off by saying books are my friend and libraries are essential. So everything that you do is highly appreciated by me. I was just saying, I know the challenges, especially now, are pretty severe with ensuring access to reading materials for everyone. And I want to thank you for that. It's really important. And I'm glad to be talking about how you can do your projects with a sustainable start. And for me, I want to make sure that you know this. Sustainability for me is really broad, including community activation, equity, of course, energy efficiency, cost management. It's about really understanding the value and the opportunities in every project, not just for the building or the room or the thing, but how you can do that in a way that positively impacts the neighborhood and the environmental systems, because when they're strong, you can be strong. So that's how I tend to look at things. And I'm going to be going through a presentation that's fairly high level to introduce some thoughts. I just want to say we had a little bit of trouble with Teams this morning. So I'm going to be using, instead of the Prezi that I developed, I'm using a PDF of that Prezi. It's not quite as theatrically attractive because it doesn't flow in the same way, but I will be providing a link to the actual Prezi. So if you want to click through it and see the relationships a little bit better than you do on the PowerPoint, on the PDF, that would be fine too. So I'm going to share my screen and get this started. And I'm going to click on my PowerPoint. So just let me know, Joanne, when you see the overall view.
We see it.
Great. Okay, so this is my overall Prezi. This is everything we're going to cover. And it's really about, it's only really in the last few minutes that I'll be talking directly about RFPs. But I think the reason is because we have to get into some context. So sustainability in your library is where we start. And what I want to do, let's see if I can make this big screen. Nope, let's keep it where it was. All right, what I want to do is ask you, everyone who's attending, when you hear or see the word sustainability, what's one of the first things that occurs to you? And please feel free to write that into chat. I think it's very important to understand how words affect people, and seeing your perception of the word sustainability can help to identify where that can be broadened or where it's already broad enough, and how that relates to how architects and contractors perceive sustainability. So please feel free to write those in. A little bit about me as we move forward is that I live in Albany, New York. I've been here for quite a while. This is actually a picture of from my favorite reading chair in my living room. And when we arrived at this house, there were no bookshelves in it. But now there are bookshelves everywhere, and I'm literally a block and a half from our local library in Pine Hills neighborhood of Albany, New York. And it's quite a wonderful library. My experience as an architect has included being an architect and a design project manager for A&E firms. It involved 15 years of working for New York State government as a director of sustainability. That was an incredible opportunity, but I left it when I felt that the work was stagnating a bit. When I left there, I moved into being a managing principal of the Albany office of a large A&E firm, and left there when we were bought by an even larger A&E firm. And then I worked for a national nonprofit designing and helping to implement energy code and building code policies nationwide with different states, and advising the federal government on the definition for zero net energy buildings. So all of that experience has been really amazing throughout. I have loved to present and to help people understand the different perspectives on an issue. So that's really what the arc of today's story is going to be. There's the intro and opening question, which I already posed to you. Context and complexity of projects, they're not simple things to design a building. The world of guidance tools, and I'll be pretty brief with that. I don't want to overwhelm anyone with the amount of guidance and rating systems that exist, but I'll list a few. Some info on state law and references to funding. And I know you had an excellent presentation just a month or so ago on funding and things to be aware of. So that's incredible. And then language on the RFPs. So to dive in about the context, conflict is vital in fiction, but it's really a good thing to avoid it in design and construction projects. And I think what often happens is people don't realize the complexity of buildings. I know this sounds kind of ridiculous, but a building is not a toaster. It's not something that comes off an assembly line. And there are no two buildings that are alike, even if they have the exact same floor plans or exact same detailing. They're built on different days by different people and in different weather conditions and with different economic strains around them. A simple single-family home can be touched by 60 to 100 people easily. And every single one of those people has to understand what that building is supposed to be. And a large-scale commercial project engages several thousand easily. So you have to think of all of those people, and I've listed some of them below. In your realm, you're going to be talking about library boards, building users, the community around you, the people who maintain the building. That's really important to make sure that you're putting materials in that they know how to manage. All of this is really vital to the work. And it's a little bit like sending someone to the library and saying, get me a really good book. Well, they might come back with a book on gnomes. If you just say about your building, this project is required to receive a rating of LEED Silver or better, that doesn't say anything, really. Because all of the guidance and rating systems are incredibly flexible. You have to define what your story is and what you want to achieve with the project that you're touching. So we've gotten, even in state government, when I was at DASNY, and I learned this through trial and error, the first policy I made for design and construction that impacted, I don't know, let's see, in 1 year, we typically completed $700 million worth of project work. We've completed them. And we touched about $7 billion worth of design and construction on a yearly basis at any one time. And my initial policy for design and construction was overly simple. It said, this project is required to receive a rating of LEED Silver or better. And the fault with this is I've already pointed to the fact that it doesn't really say what your building needs to achieve. It also puts a phrase in here that would scare any architect who knows anything about liability away, because the architect doesn't have any say in what the reviewer is going to decide on the project. The documentation could be perfect. All of the submissions could be wonderful. If that reviewer has a bad day, or if there's one point that is missed because of some update that was an error in the design documentation, you might not get the rating that is required by the contract, and that is a liability that's huge. So that when I updated the policy, we changed it to say that the project had set sustainable goals and was required to submit for a third-party review of the project under any approved system of rating. And the goal would be set for energy and for materials, and that there would be no fault to the architect if it wasn't achieved at that level, if good effort was made. That's a kind of a false, oversimplified way that I put it, but we put the flexibility back in, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more. So to lead or not to lead was not said by Shakespeare, but it's poetic nonetheless. We'll talk about a few guidance and rating systems. And these are just the ones that come to top of my mind. So the LEED rating system, and I'll do just a few sentences on each of these. And I want to make the qualifier, we have talked, all of these relate really to larger building systems, either new additions to a building or a brand new building or a serious renovation of a building. And then I will point out what parts and pieces can also relate to smaller construction projects, to smaller changes, anything from furnishings to retrofitting a room or dealing with an energy system in the building. So you're probably most familiar with the term LEED. That's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And the system was developed late in the 1990s, close to 2000, by the U.S. Green Building Council. That's the USGBC. That's a national nonprofit, but it also has spawned green building councils in many, many nations. And there's also a World Green Building Council. And all of them use some rendition of the LEED rating system, further defined for their specific situations in their countries. It touches, I think, 80% of the countries that are on this planet, which is quite amazing. So they're in version 5 now, and the versions indicate what, as the industry learns, the versions provide updates. And version 5 is starting to talk about much more deeply embodied carbon, which is carbon is when we burn fossil fuels, to very much simplify it. And in building energy systems, it's very easy to understand that reducing energy use reduces the carbon emissions from burning. Electrifying buildings eliminates the carbon emissions on site. There might still be carbon that's burned at the energy production site because our electricity grid is not fully clean yet. Renewable energy allows us to avoid using fossil fuels. When we talk about materials, the term currently is embodied carbon or embedded carbon, and that is all of the energy use and the carbon emissions from extracting the materials from the earth, or farming them, or milling them for lumber, and then the production of the material. So if you have chairs in your library, those chairs have a carbon burden. That's their embodied carbon. If you have materials in your project, if your new building is made out of steel, that has a different embodied carbon burden than a building that's made out of wood, because wood not only has less carbon in the production and bringing it to the site. It also stores carbon. So you can be using your building as a storage mechanism for carbon and drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. Very, very technical. So LEED version 5 is diving into that. There's also LEED for existing buildings, which gives a whole methodology for how to operate a building in a more sustainable way. The Living Building Challenge is much more aspirational, and it's created by what used to be called the International Living Futures Institute and is now just called Living Futures. That sets very high-level goals such as community, beauty, energy, and water. And the goal is to, for example, in the water category, not use any more water than what falls naturally onto that site. So what you're doing is striving to live within the constraints of environmental systems. And it's incredibly challenging, but also opens up a much broader thought process that can guide projects at all different levels. There are very few living buildings in the world, but one of them is in Rhinebeck. It's the Omega, the Center for Sustainable Living at the Omega Center, and it's a zero net energy living building, wastewater treatment plant, and yoga studio. So they treat black water waste from their entire campus, from toilets and from dishwashers and from showers, in this building while people are on yoga mats doing their yoga, because that's how beautifully it's designed and how much nature helps them to move forward. Passive House is a German system that is now international, and their FIAS is Passive House International US. So the system is is designed for the US because we have many climate zones. Germany only has one. So it's expanded to acknowledge the vast differences in the United States of weather and temperature and thermal humidity levels. And it is used kind of as a base. It can be used as a base for any building trying to get to zero net energy performance and healthy performance, because it focuses on investing money in the thermal qualities of a building and making sure that very little energy is needed to be used. So a typical passive house construction, and it can be commercial, it can be a house. The word passive house comes from the German, and in German, house, H-A-U-S, means building. So it's really a misnomer in English, but this style of building means that right out of the gate, a new construction can be 80% better performing with energy than an energy code compliant building. And then you can build from there as far as what materials you select, etc. Energy Star is something I'm sure you're very familiar with, and there are performance raters that help to determine the energy performance. Energy Star has a focus on homes, but there's also a large-scale nationwide resource called Energy Star Portfolio Manager that commercial buildings and larger scale buildings can add in all of their building information. And that Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is an EPA and an Environmental Protection Agency and Department of Energy supported system, which is unfortunately currently in danger. That particular system gives me as an architect an ability to look at their listing and say, wow, if I'm building a library and I'm looking at libraries as a particular building type, I can see what the national mean level of energy use is. And then I can use that as a starting point for discussions about how low I can drive the energy. So I have a basis in reality to start having real conversations about how to design more effectively. The Framework for Design Excellence is something I'm becoming intimately involved with, and this was created by the American Institute of Architects. And I've been very impressed with it because, and I'll show you it in a little more detail in a minute, it helps to guide, I would say, not just design teams, but owner teams to having discussions that are broader than how do we build a building and what do we need to put in it and how many square feet do we need for offices, to talk about those larger system impacts that I mentioned before. And then we can come down to the basics, the laws that affect the buildings. And energy code is a law. What's really interesting to me, and should be maybe to everyone, is that NYSERDA did a study on projects that comply with energy code, new buildings, and something around 65% of new buildings do not comply with energy code. Now, a lot of that lack of compliance is actually administrative lack of compliance. The information hasn't been fully submitted properly, or they've misunderstood what their building type is, or something really basic to performing a good energy code. But a lot of it is also that I teach energy code training for a nonprofit as well, and I've taught more than 1,000 building professionals and building officials. And people don't understand energy code and how a building actually works. So there are a lot of people working on improving that. One of the things that is important in accessing design services is making sure that not only does that design professional have experience with sustainable buildings, but can talk about energy code in a very real way. And I can if we have time and that becomes a question, I can get into that in a little more detail, but I just wanted to mention that. And when I say it's based on a model code, there's IECC, which is the International Energy Code Council, and they, along with ASHRAE, which is I'll always get the acronym wrong, the Society of Heating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Engineers. So there's the International Code Council, and then there's also ASHRAE, which is an American organization. They build model codes, and those codes can be adopted by states and municipalities as they are, or most states adjust them. New York is infamous for adjusting model codes to fit New York State, but most of our tweaks are around definitions of what we consider to be an existing building, or what we consider to be we changed the definition of mobile home, for example. So we do some minor tweaks usually. So when you get into how to define sustainability, you really have to write your own story. You have to define with your library board, or if you have a building committee, including hopefully the people who maintain your building and several people who use your building, define what your interests are. And I've listed a few things here. It could be anything from the very obvious, which is energy, because saving energy saves money, and that's a direct connection, to supporting the local economy through focusing on local materials. It can be community connection because your municipality has a concern about disenfranchised neighborhoods that maybe need a safe place to be if there's a real power issue or a flood. We could talk about resilience. It can be about the library activating outdoor spaces around the library so the community doesn't just enjoy the library and benefit from the books, but also from the community connectivity that goes on there. And it can be about reusing buildings in your neighborhood or reusing other resources. So it comes down to making sure you kind of look at your own background and make sure that you're taking into account specific goals that you've already established. If your library has said, we recognize the climate law of New York State and that we should be thinking about zero net energy buildings, every project we do should do something toward achieving zero net energy. Well, whoever you're reaching out to with an RFP should definitely be aware of that goal. It's also about if you need help defining specific goals. A lot of this is you're not designers, you're not contractors. So in what way can that service inform your work and help you to achieve things beyond what you knew were achievable? And you need to really take all the benefit from a relationship with an architect that you possibly can. And when we're talking about funding, and I know that the last presentation went really deep, what kind of goals have to be met to receive funding? I know in some cases, for example, I think in one of the grants that DASNY provides, it's really about resilience. So you have to define what's happening with your project that is resilient, that will help the community and help the building recover, but also adapt when something is not going well. Like resilience is, of course, beyond the planetary systems and the weather. It's also financial resilience and usability resilience and durability of the building. So all of those things should be defined in any kind of funding, and the design itself would have to help that to be clear if you need certain proof mechanisms. So I'm going to touch again a little deeper in on the design, the framework for design excellence. And I'm just going to point out a couple of questions here and a couple of pieces. When you're designing for the economy, according to the AIA, you should be asking yourself questions like, how will the design choices balance out with long-term value? Quite often you're challenged by, our budget is X, and we know that this one material can last for 100 years and this other material only lasts for 20. And there's a cost differential. How do we manage that and make a choice that's informed to balance those goals? And again, the design professional should be part of that discussion. I mean, one of the most detrimental materials that's in use still is, well, there are two that come to mind. One, asbestos. Surprisingly enough, even though asbestos has been proven to be dangerous, it's still used, especially in roofing asphalt tiles, and still sold at Home Depot in many products. So that's something that should be avoided. Even though asbestos is a really long-term performer, it's probably not worth the health risk. So that's a balance that would have to be struck, and an awareness that needs to be there. So those are great questions. Design for water. How does the project handle rainfall and stormwater responsibly? Here's a big question in water. How does the project contribute to a healthy regional watershed? I know some architects now that never start a project without looking at the full aquifer that project impacts. And I think that's quite brilliant, personally. Right now, you might be getting scared about these big questions and how they inform the work. The key here is to use these big questions to make sure you're not missing any opportunities that will make your project that much better for you and the community and the natural resources within your budget and within your time frame. So these are just discussion points that could open up some doors to more splendid results. Design for resources, about managing waste throughout the life cycle. All of these questions are really quite amazing. Design for energy. How can the project exceed building code efficiency standards to approach net zero energy and net zero carbon? It's not saying do this. It's saying, how can you get on that path? What would create a situation where you can learn from this project and then the next project is that much better? What can you do in this project that gives you an opportunity to upgrade the systems when they fail in 20 years, because energy systems do have a shorter lifespan than the building itself, so that you can then position yourself for the next improvement in technology? And then I think these are the three that spark me the most. Ecosystems, design for well-being. If you're talking about a library that, and please correct me if I'm off base, but libraries are true community centers in every town that I've lived in, with activities and with an ability to connect people. There's a great question about how can the project be welcoming and inclusive for all? How can the design encourage a healthy lifestyle? So I think that's pretty exciting stuff. And ultimately, from all of that information about guidance and rating systems, it comes down to what are your aspirations. And I put in this is a little shot from one of my sketchbooks. And I'm just checking the time. I got to wrap it up. That shows how we often think. And what happens here is there's a line of what we know is what the building should do. And something breaks, there's a problem. And then we fix it and we bring it right up to where it was before. But we have an opportunity to say, well, what do we ideally want it to be now? This is 10 years later or 20 years after the building has been built. What opportunities do we have now to actually achieve greater potential instead of just fixing? Again, this is a pain point for some people because quite often you just have the money to fix something. But in a quick story, when I worked at DASNY, we decided we were going to change our humidification system. 20 years ago, if you didn't have a good humidity level in a building, the photocopiers wouldn't work, and paper was affected. And I'm sure you experience this in libraries where you want a certain thermal range and humidity. So we had a humidifier that was a steam-based humidifier. It cost us $120,000 a year to run, to create the steam to humidify the building. We were going to replace it with a cool mist humidifier, which would cost us probably $20,000 a year to run, because it was just going to use cool mist and ultraviolet light to make sure there weren't any mold issues. And it was a much more efficient and newer system, really innovative. So we decommissioned the current system of humidification, planning to replace it with this new system. And there was a delay in the paperwork getting done. And in that delay period, we actually assessed how the building was running. And it turned out that we didn't need the humidification system at all. And we took that opportunity to say, we're not replacing it. The potential is that we can save a lot of money and a lot of energy and maintain our comfort. And that's not something we realized that could happen. And it was due to all of the small repairs we had made in the interim, tightening the building, increasing the number of people within the building, et cetera. So I think that's a great example. You sometimes fix things out of habit instead of asking questions. All right, now on to the setting for all of this. The laws, the funds, the programmatic needs, and the local contractors. We have a law in New York State called the Climate Law. It's also called CLCPA, which is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is a horrible acronym. So I always call it the Climate Law. It is a law. 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 for all sectors of the state. Embodied carbon is in the scoping document, so it calls out that we should be, if we're building with concrete, for example, using a lower carbon concrete, which has less cement in it, but uses other materials that function very similar to cement. It's an aspirational law. So what has happened is most of the sectors of the state are waiting for somebody in the governor's office to say what they should do. But being aware of this aspirational law means that you have the right to say to an architect and to contractors to point them to this information and to say, we want to be inspiring our community related to this law. And by the way, it's a law. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. It's not going to be easy, but it is information from you. And you should, if you get a chance, look up the Climate Law of New York State, and they have a very simple summary there. If you want to read, as people associated with libraries, if you want to read the 480-page scoping document, you're more than welcome to do that as well. You can focus on the housing and energy efficiency, which really gets into buildings deeply. Grant parameters, and this was mentioned in the bit of the presentation. I watched the whole presentation, but in one bit of the presentation last time, there was stated that there's a requirement of using specific language, such as restore, renovate, rehabilitate, or refurbish. There are many grant parameters. They can be time parameters, they can be money parameters, they can be proof mechanism, and they could be language. So those have to be communicated to any design team, because in order to meet them, or any contractors, because in order to meet these parameters, they have to be woven into the process. Community needs. Has your municipality said that urban heat island impact and the greater heat in a city, have they said it's an issue? Have they pointed out, do they have a sustainability plan? Have they pointed out that people need a place to go as a cooling station? And if that is a community need and the library can be a cooling station, what a great place to kill a few hours, right? When the power goes out or when it gets too hot. If the library can be a cooling station, is there funding to support your doing that could help you to do the project you want to do? Project size, I've mostly spoken in terms of larger projects that have architects, but small or limited projects will have different potential than a large capital project, and I'll touch on that a little bit in the language. But typically, if you're not having a designer, you'll be working directly with a contractor or directly with a material supplier. You can still define goals around material and ask questions about what is in that chair or that table. Is it using toxic materials? Is it able to be composted after you're done using it? And if any of you want a list of good material questions, I would be glad to help devise that for your library. I think that would be quite interesting. If you want more information on materials, there's a thing called the Common Material Framework. And I'll put some of these in a note that Joanna can send out afterwards as well. The Common Material Framework lists 5 things that are important to consider in materials. And usually you're able to, we're still making progress, but a lot of material suppliers, you're able to say, have you considered these 5 things? What have you achieved across this range? And then the key thing is getting built. What will entice the contractors to bid on a bigger project or propose on a smaller one? So we'll touch on language, and it's really about knowing your readers. If you're clear in language, if you're consistent, and if you allow the right tool to be chosen by those who need to use it, they will be empowered to do really good work on a project. We only have a few slides left, but they're very wordy. I'm not going to read everything. When you're doing a larger project where you want to hire an architect and you're reaching out with a request for proposal from an architect, as I mentioned, saying this project will achieve LEED Silver or better is not a good intro to your story. First of all, LEED Silver, it's been shown that most buildings that achieve energy code compliance are already at approximately that level if they were designed by somebody who's paying attention to materials as well. So it's an underachievement. And it really doesn't tell your story. So better is to say this needs to meet the sustainability goals of the owner, and then list your sustainability goals. And then follow up by a third-party review. This will be submitted for a LEED rating, so that some third party is going to look to see if all of the I's have been dotted and the T's have been crossed. And still better, relying on the architect for being part of the solution set. That also helps the architect to define what's possible beyond your knowledge, because you're not an architect. So hopefully, if you have a charrette, which means a meeting to set the goals for the project, you will gain information from the architect, and that's why you're hiring them. And you can also define in this that you will accept any system, any third-party rating system that makes sense, so long as you're comfortable with that rating system. And that gives the architect an ability to say, hey, this project is really energy focused, so we're only going to use a system that focuses on energy, like Passive House, or like one of the petals, one of the parts and pieces of the living building suite of guidance. And I think that could be really, really powerful. And then finally, as I mentioned, you're hiring an architect ultimately for their expertise and saying that you want to achieve something like full electrification or zero net energy, and that you don't know how to get there. In your request for proposal, saying that you expect the proposing design team to explore the systems with you and to define the goals, the reasonable goals on that path. As an architect, seeing that kind of language would make me dive into a project faster than anything else. And then for contractors, and I'm probably, there's some big stuff and some little stuff here. So again, when you say this project will achieve LEED Silver, a lot of contractors still just run away from a project that says something like that, because they know that it's going to be a big burden of documentation, that they're going to have to receive information about all the parts and pieces of the building in a different way, and they're going to have to then provide it to the architect to submit for the rating review. That's okay. They're allowed to be scared of that. But you can use language that is a little more aware of that. So this project has clear goals. Oh, look, I spelt achieve wrong on one of these slides. I fixed it, but then I couldn't get to the Prezi. So this is an older print. Sorry about that. So large projects with bids, this project has clear goals, and then spell out to them documentation of specific material qualities will be required in support of submission. That sounds a lot better than this project's going to achieve LEED Silver or better. For small projects, this project intends to use materials and systems that support the health of the building occupants. Really, when it comes down to materials, the focus typically is the health of the people in the building. You could also define that you want to focus on the health of the manufacturers of the products. But I think this is a pretty good statement. And these products might be different from the materials you typically use. Please note any materials specifically called out before providing a proposal. So if you say that you want to focus on procuring a new reception desk, a new information desk, and a design for that desk, and you want to work directly with a manufacturer and a contractor to install it, they need to understand that they are working with a material that is locally provided, and there's going to be an artisan that's helping to craft that. And I think that clarity is really, really important. Anytime especially a contractor is surprised, they will be trying to, and this is not a slam against them, I don't blame them, they will be trying to make up for that confusion by pointing out where the documents did not allow them to provide an informed bid for the work. All right, so in summary, and then we'll open it up for lots of Q&A, I hope. Tell your story. Know your needs, your context, the funding rules, and the local talent. I mean, we had one case where we were using you've probably heard of Hardy Plank, which is James Hardy Company, and it's a cement-based board that can be used as siding, and it can be applied just like plank siding on a house. But when it first was becoming popular as a material, very few contractors knew how to use it, because the mounting of it required, in most cases, pre-drilling holes and screwing the boards on, which is quite different than just slamming a nail through a piece of plank. And that raised a lot of concerns about cost, and there were a lot of failures of application. So understand what the local talent is capable of doing as well. Be clear in communicating all of these as part of the work. So when you write a request,
I found some web results. I can show them if you
Sorry.
ask again from your iPhone.
my little Siri just talked to me. It was really strange. Be clear in communicating these as part of the work. And ask for subject matter guidance and make use of it. When you reach out for somebody as a design team or an artisan or a contractor to work on a smaller project or a retrofit to a room, even, build there. You can't just hand off the information and walk away, because they can inform your goals and you can inform their success in the work. And that is pretty much the summary. And that is my information. Feel free to reach out to me. My website needs a little bit of updating. I'm doing more consulting now, so I need to add in a page there. But there are a lot of great articles about process and about designing and about context. Feel free to poke around there. And I will, as I said, take some of the resources that I mentioned and include them in the information, and we'll send you the link to the Prezi so you can actually see how beautiful it is when you get to see this whole layout and see it jump around. 2 pictures that you didn't get to see because of using the PDF. This is actually on the middle upper part of the screen is a shot of the library stacks at Pratt University. And there are glass, every floor is glass, and you can see down, the light comes through the floors, and all of the library stacks are these beautiful wrought end caps with all of the beautiful work there. And then this picture is the Pine Hills Library, which is a block and a half from my house, and it's a renovation of an old telecom building. And they did a whole gut rehab, and part of the project includes sitting areas out in the front overlooking a place called the Point, which is where several roads come together. And along one side of the building, they have a lovely butterfly garden, and they have very limited parking because we're on about 8 or 10 different transit stations for the local busing. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And hopefully there's some things in chat that we can get into, and anyone can raise their hand to ask any questions.
Well, first there was someone who said, yes, please send a good materials list.
All right, great.
You answered this during the presentation, but I think it bears repeating. So is energy code state-based?
Yes, it's the model code is adopted typically by states, and the state updates it, so it's state-based. If a state does not adjust the code and adopt a code specifically, by default they have to be dealing with the model code, the national, what's considered the model code. What's interesting in New York State is that we also have a New York stretch code, and the stretch code is a more rigorous energy code that it can be adopted by municipalities. So if a municipality adopts the stretch code, that is the energy code that any building within that municipality will have to meet. New York City uses the New York stretch code as their base and tweaks it to be even a little better. So New York City is pretty advanced, but of course they're dealing with a really different building type overall than most of the rest of the state. That's a great question.
Allison has
anyone else want to hit me up?
Raised.
Yeah, I'm just curious about, because, you know, if you have an older building and such, and you have a lot of different needs, is trying to find that ability to figure out what's the most important, what's the most manageable and most realistic, as well as alleviating your guilt for not being able to get those things this year. If you cannot tell, it's my first year as a director, so I'm trying to like manage my expectations but still do the best I can.
Understood.
In the library, and it's such a tricky balance. So you seem very experienced in this, that I figure you might have a little insight on the mindset you need to while managing this, because I think that's what I guess it comes down to, is like the attitude and mindset you need to get through each step.
Yeah, it's really interesting. For an existing building, first of all, anyone who's renovating or reusing an existing building or maintaining an existing building. Kudos to you, because you're already doing the thing that's best for the environment. You're actually, the embodied carbon in a building is incredibly valuable, and we have a tendency to want to like tear down old buildings and build new. And the reality is, if we can make use of an existing building, that can reduce, compared to building a new building, we're talking 50, it's a study reveals about 55% carbon reduction in just reusing an existing building. And if all of the materials that are brought into that building are also, like all the furniture and fit out, if there's also attention to sustainability in those, a reused, smartly done existing building can reduce the carbon burden by 87% over building a new building. And then in order to identify your priorities, there's so many parts and pieces, Allison. I think you might want to write some ideas down and then decide if you need to find someone to help you prioritize, because you're dealing with funding, you're dealing with the actual programmatic needs, you're dealing with changes in how people use a library. So you have to, I think the main thing is understanding what your cost parameters are, and then determining how to best support the people coming to the library and the staff by selecting the thing that most needs attention. If you could do a couple of those things that most needs attention and do it in a way that if it impacts energy, you can say we can either just fix it or we can go a little bit beyond fixing and make it better for the future. That's probably a mental step you can take in that way on your own with your library board or with a facilitator or an advisor. Does that help at all?
That is amazing. Just writing down those statistics made me feel so much better too, because I did, luckily I have the previous interim director return to our program library assistant, so she still works here. So I checked with her, and then I have a facilities meeting with the committee next week for the board. So that also affirmed that I'm getting the right input from where I need to, so that I have those kind of checks and balances, so I'm not getting like tunnel vision.
Got it.
Thank you. This is perfect. Let me stop talking.
Yeah, you're fine. And I see next is Peggy with her hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you. This is a very specific question in terms of materials, but we're looking at putting new windows in a 1970s era building that still has the original windows.
Oh, yay.
And I didn't know much about windows, but vinyl is what all three of my contractors who have provided estimates have suggested we use. And I just wondered, I mean, and I guess there's double or triple, or I'm not sure, maybe they're all triple glazed. So yeah, what?
No, this is great. Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, it's a 1970s building. Is it under any kind of historic preservation laws?
No.
Okay, because that's right at the border now, right? Which makes me feel really old. But there we go.
Yeah.
So good. You don't have to worry about SHPO. That's good. They can be partners, but they can also be a struggle working with SHPO. So I would say I'm going to be honest, when I hear vinyl, I cringe. Not because it's not an effective material, but because in production, it is incredibly dangerous for the workers in production. And I'm trying to avoid vinyl. However, when you're looking at windows, I can probably write out a little more of this for you, but energy-wise, the worst performer is like the aluminum windows, the metal frame windows, because they leak energy. They have the thermal bridging is a huge issue with energy loss, with heat loss or cooling loss. They also have a big differential in how the materials move, so they break down faster than other windows. The best performer environmentally tends to be wood windows, and the material is benign, and you can get if you want a metal cladding for the outside to increase durability, but they're also expensive and heavy. In the middle is a really well designed vinyl window, and I'm talking that you really have to pay attention to how that frame is designed, because there are cheap vinyl windows that are horrible performers. So it has to be a really robust, very rigid vinyl window. There's also a thing that your contractors might not know about, which is pultruded fiberglass. And that is an incredibly rigid frame, much less toxic, certainly not an off-gasser of toxins once it's fully manufactured. Vinyl has the danger of having environmental off-gassing for years after it's made. Energy performance, a really high quality vinyl window and a pultruded fiberglass, I would say they're in the same range. They can be double glazed or triple glazed. If energy is your focus, the investment in triple glazed is a good idea. But if your walls leak, don't even bother. Just do a smart window that really works for you, and then focus on the parts of your building that can be upgraded with insulation and weather stripping, and you'll go very, very far. Hopefully that covers some material for you.
Yes, but what was the word that you used describing the fiberglass?
It's pultruded, P-U-L. It's like extruded, but instead of being forced out, it's pulled out.
Okay.
And it's interesting because fiberglass is not a favorite of mine either, but once it's cured, it is really stable. And even in the manufacturer, it's less toxic than vinyl and less carcinogenic.
Okay. Can you, perhaps off this meeting, recommend the good vinyl varieties or brands?
I think I can. Let me see if I'm gonna write myself a note. And I think that I need to look to see where Marvin is. Marvin Windows. They used to have a really good vinyl, but I haven't looked in a while. I haven't been directly designing in a while. So let me just look and see what I've missed.
Okay, great. Thank you. I can email you.
Yeah. Oh, that would be great. Absolutely. Okay. Anyone can feel free to email me, and I'm going to put my my email in the chat so you can grab it easily. All right, who's next? We have Pine Hills Library, but I don't know who that is.
Yes, hi, it's Gisi.
Hi.
Hi. We have a 1903 building, so obviously we're dealing with SHPO. And when you just brought up the yeah, it was right. Brought up the windows, I would be interested in that too. I mean, I don't even know if that would be anything that we could use or not, but I'm still, because we have to do something about our windows. So maybe you can send out that information to all of us. And you had mentioned independent people who would be helpful with sorry, I lost my train of thought, so I don't even remember what my question was.
Maybe you were talking about facilitation and setting the goals.
Yes. So who can we reach out to for help with that? I mean, we would like to build an addition, and it just feels very subjective. Whoever you reach out to, you know, they have their ideas or cookie cutters or plans. So, but also we want to do something good for the environment. Of course, the price tag, SHPO. There's a lot of moving parts. I know, and I know nothing about building.
There's a lot of
moving
parts.
So who can be helpful?
Well, I think that well, I could probably rattle off 20 different architecture firms that have the skill set and of all different sizes. I think that I'm trying to think what the best resource for finding those on your own would be, because you also have to be careful about me being biased because I'm a human being. But if you find, it's really interesting, like 75% of the architecture firms in the nation have fewer than 10 people on their staff. Architecture is a very intimate, small resource, right? So, and you'd want to find an architect that can spend some time with you face to face. So it should be someone in your area. I think that the best thing to do is, when you're starting the process, define those things. Say, here are the things that are burdening our process, burdening or benefiting. I mean, SHPO could be a benefit. I don't mean to slam on them, but and we need someone who can help us to define our project parameters and then take part in designing. What is your fee for the facilitation of setting the goals first? Maybe you reach out for that service first, and then you can move forward with the design based on the information you get from them.
Right.
And I would reach out to your local, as a starting point, I would probably reach out to your local American Institute of Architects coalition, and reach out to staff there. They might be able to get you started on what's going on. You can also.
Sorry, what was the office called? American what?
It's American Institute of Architects.
Institute. Thank
AIA.
you.
Yeah, AIA is a really represents, not every architect, but a lot. It has 120,000 members nationwide. So
that should be enough.
Yeah. and again, they represent big and small. So you can also go to the U.S. Green Building Council, USGBC. And USGBC has a member directory that I think you can search. I don't know if you can search it on location though, but if I find anything else, I'll put it in my notes as well.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks so much.
Great. Sure. And look, Joanna put the link right in there for AIA. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you, Joanna.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else have any questions? I kind of love the work you all do. I hope that you find the right facilitators to help you maintain the beauty and the connectivity and the education and access to all of the written words in the world.
Thank you so much. I see the someone's typing sign. So we'll give another moment in case that's a question, but you are getting a bunch of thank yous. So while
you're welcome,
we're seeing if any last minute questions come in, just a quick reminder to everyone, there will be a follow-up email with a program evaluation and the program slides. I will do my best to include some of these links as well. And tomorrow or next week, there will be, the recording will be available. Well, I think that's it.
It truly was my pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Jody. This is great.
Yeah. Okay.
Everyone enjoy the rest of your day.